Welcome to the ATA podcast, where we talk to former elite athletes sharing their insights and wisdom derived from successfully transitioning into life beyond the game. Very warm welcome to the Athlete Transition Accelerator. Carl and I are once again joined by a fascinating guest who's going to share his story of transition from elite sport into industry. We're delighted to welcome James Hildreth, who one club man, 20-year career. So that's the first sort of a bell ringing here. This is the longest serving sporting career that we've had on the show. We had Joe Jacobson, I think, got to 19 years. So James has done a great job there. I'm not here to embarrass you, James, but looking at some of your stats, I mean, when you put all forms of the game together, I think over 700 games, I think you're knocking on the door, you're not far off 30,000 runs. There's close to 50 centuries. There's a 303 not out. It's a pretty stellar career. One of the opening things we always ask our guests, and I'm sure you'll have an abundance of wonderful memories to pick from, is pull out one or two memories, something that now that you've hung up the boots, you've retired, brings a sense of pride. And with a 20-year journey to look back on, I'm sure there'll be more than one or two. But what comes to mind when I ask you that question, James?
I think it has to be, and actually I've probably got, I don't know if you can see them on the screen, but there's a couple of medals behind me.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
20 years and I only won two competitions, which I don't know if that's a
No, that's your
decent
humility
ratio.
talking it down now.
There we
Yeah.
go. Yeah, I quite clearly don't like change with 20 years at the same club, do I? But no. So the two are the domestic trophies. So winning the 20 over domestic competition in 2005 at the Oval was very memorable. Girls allowed were playing at half time. Not that was the reason why it wasn't memorable, but that was just I was young at the time, and that really was kind of a tournament that was early on in my career and that first kind of taste of success. And I was very naive then. And then actually the second one, which was the one day competition, was in 2019 that we won. And actually the time difference between the two was so much. The 2019 competition was just almost the most memorable. It was a winning final at Lord's. And actually you kind of realise over that time what it means to the club and the southwest of England, and the rest of the players to win competitions. In 2005, it was just, oh, we've won. That's awesome. But then you realise how important it was, and that massive time between the two made it all the more sweet, actually. So, yeah, I suppose those two. I know that's the obvious thing to say, winning trophies, but ultimately, one of the reasons for getting into sport is kind of winning, isn't it? And winning competitions. It's definitely not the most important, I don't think, but it's up there. So, in terms of the memorable stuff that stands out, yeah, it's probably those two.
And I think, yeah, you're obviously a humble guy, and nonetheless, I have to ask the question. You've got a stand named after you now, haven't you, in Somerset? So again, we're breaking boundaries left, right, and centre here. The first elite athlete on the show that's got a stand named after them. Now, all jokes aside, what a wonderful gesture. But it must feel a little bit surreal. Do you go back? Do you get to go back and watch any cricket and sit in your own stand?
Yeah, it's like I've died, isn't it? It's a weird one having a stand named after you. I think, I mean, just from what you said at the beginning, I think it's the fact that I played for the same club for 20 years, gave a lot to the club, and actually nowadays you don't see that. People
No.
they play for loads of different teams over their career, and rightly so. They're chasing different things now. It's a bit different for me, so I think it was just a recognition of that, staying at Somerset for all those years, but. It is very strange. I mean, it's odd. I did initially see if I could get any royalties, but they weren't happy with
How many
that.
seats is it?
So I don't. Yeah, I think it's about 3 or 4 seats. I don't know. No,
Yeah.
there's not many in there, but it's odd. I go back to the ground because I live just up the road, and kind of work-wise now, I take clients back there because it's quite a nice thing to do if who like cricket. So I do go back and see it, and do have to pinch myself because you get into sport because you love sport and you just want to play with your mates. And there's no other agendas to it. You just want to get better at sport, move up the levels, and have a laugh on a weekend. So now you do kind of have that pinch yourself moment where you think, well, I didn't achieve what I wanted to in my career. So there's always going to be tinges of disappointment with my career. But going back and seeing that, and I guess there's not many that can say they've had something kind of named after them. So yeah, I mean, it's an absolute honor. It was great, and just the overriding emotion is just bizarre, bloody bizarre.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Amazing. So it's an amazing career. It's an amazing career. And I'm just going to go off script a little bit here, Jim, because we talk about this all the time, and it often gets brought up with former athletes. How much in that moment when you won your two domestic trophies or you hit your 303 and you were breaking these records, how much did you allow yourself in that moment to actually enjoy it? Or has it more been a reflective practice that you realized what it was you achieved?
That's a great question. I think the enjoyment bit definitely comes after. There's a lot of relief. Um, I mean, there's loads of different emotions kind of bundled up when you win a competition. There's relief, there's just euphoria of winning it. There's the absolute um, kind of shenanigans, the fun of what goes on in that night,
Yeah.
the kind of partying, potentially for another episode. But you
Yeah,
get,
can't talk
you get,
about that.
yeah, you can't, yeah, yeah. But you definitely enjoy it because you realize what it means, and I think the hardest thing is taking it all in. So it goes so quick. So we won the competition, and we were, singing our song at Lord's in front of one of the stands. And it's really hard to just almost take a step back and go, kind of absorb the environment because
Hmm.
everything just you get asked to do interviews or you're doing this and that, and then the lads are like, right, let's go into the change room and have a drink, and then you're going into the hotel, you're celebrating with all the families, but the time just goes just so quick. You don't have, I think most people that it's just that taking a step back during the event to go, actually, this is amazing. So the enjoyment thing, I think it's a reflective piece, as your career goes on, and actually afterwards when you're sitting in a pub having a chat or reflecting like this, and then you go, actually you can take pride in that, but it's really hard at the time. You're just
Yeah.
absorbed in it and you just kind of go with it.
Yeah, perfect. It's just something that keeps coming up as we talk to athletes is the wish they were able to just enjoy it a little bit more when they were in that moment. But you're right. I mean, it goes by so quick. Next season comes along, off you go again, new challenge, new obstacles. So, but I just want to take you back to the that period in 2022 when you actually made the decision to leave cricket and move into this second chapter, because unfortunately, the majority of athletes that we get to talk to, their reason for transition is injury. It's been forced upon them. Or more recently in rugby, for example, the financial sort of landscape of rugby union and clubs just disappearing into administration. I'm assuming from the length of your career that the reason for your transition was it was just your decision. You'd achieved what you wanted to achieve, and it was just time to move into that next chapter.
I think so. I definitely took the decision to retire. It probably would have been taken for me at some point in within that season or the season afterwards. I think there was a number of different reasons. I felt comfortable retiring. I wanted to take control of that decision, so I didn't want to be pushed out the door. I wanted to go on my own. I wanted to be able to go back to Somerset, watch some cricket, and not feel and just be a supporter and not
Mhm.
feel any kind of resentment to Somerset for them having to make a decision they potentially didn't really want to make. So I wanted to take control of that, and I was very comfortable with doing that. I don't know how much you guys kind of see what cricket's like at the moment compared to other sports, but when I played in 2022, cricket was just moving in such a different direction. And I mentioned around winning the one day competition. That was probably the last final that it was the proper one day cup, and then it moved into a different kind of competition, and because there was this new 100 competition coming in. So I didn't get into the new 100 competition. So I was playing in this almost second team one day comp, and my relevance within cricket was kind of dropping away a bit as well. I've always wanted to kind of be the best that I could, and so that was I was because I was losing my relevancy and thinking I want to be playing in that competition, but I'm not. I was thinking actually it's probably now time to start looking at life after cricket. I'd been thinking about it for a long time anyway, but there were just a few things leading up to that season, and one of them was injuries. I did my hamstring. The body was getting a bit older. I think the eyes were probably going a bit. Cricket was changing and how it was played. There was just a number of little things that thought, I don't want to just be kicking the can down the road in terms of retirement. You can't play sport until you're 65, so I know that I'm going to have a second career. The professional sports people retire twice, so it's one of those things that I thought I'm going to retire my first time and take control of that, and knowing what I was going to move into afterwards as well. So during that season, I actually said to the coaches at the beginning of that season, this will be my last season, because I wanted to go out on my own accord, really.
No, good for you. And as Carl
Yeah.
said, it's a rarity, James, to be able to be in that sense of control. And you've alluded to there, you sort of knew what you were going to be doing. So take us forward from that point. Just give us a little bit of an overview, I suppose, of the timeline of what you did when you stepped out of cricket and what that brings you to in the present day and what you're doing currently now.
Yeah, well, I suppose just to go back a little bit in terms of during my career, I was always someone personality type that had an eye on after cricket and having to do stuff during my career just to see if I enjoyed it, if I didn't enjoy it, to build something up for life after cricket. I was always fearful that if I wasn't prepared during that transition, I'd seen friends fall off a cliff at the end of their career financially, emotionally. Not to have a too morbid statistic, but cricket's got the highest suicide rate than any other sport post career. Quite aware that people really struggle. Graham
Mm,
Thorpe was the most recent one.
yes.
Yeah.
So I've always had that in my mind. So actually, I did all my coaching badges, did my level 4 coaching badge, did a master's in sports psychology, went and spent some time in different businesses, accountants, and trying to work out really from quite early on um, the area I wanted to go down. And so, I mean, after a bit of searching, I went down the kind of financial services route, and that was networking, connecting with people that are involved in the club that are in worked in that space. Like our CEO was also in kind of that wealth management industry. So chatting to them, I thought actually I can see a career in that. So I did my exams while I was still playing, and then knew that I would be transitioning out onto kind of a financial advisory academy. So I did that as I was retiring, and that was a 12-week course because I'd already done all my exams. And then I knew that I was going to be setting up my own business. I was always quite comfortable with doing that and going self-employed. So really, all these things, even though they seemed like I was finishing cricket, going into something else, they'd actually been building up for quite a while previously during my career. And I knew exactly what I was going to be doing post career. It's never a linear process. Careers aren't like that. A lot of people have portfolio careers now, but I knew which the stepping stone I was starting on post cricket. Who knows where it will go in the future? So now I'm at the point where self-employed, got my own wealth management business, which started in 2022. So into my third year now, and that's growing nicely.
Well, I'm scribbling as you're talking here, James, because what you touched on here is so many of the themes, and people who are used to listening to the podcast will be starting to hear these themes. And we make no apology for that because actually, the unifying theme of every athlete we speak to is a sense of trepidation, fear, and anxiety of what's coming next. So the whole raison d'etre for ATA is, well, how do we help reduce that fear? How do we remove that sense of anxiety and replace it with a sense of confidence and excitement? And speaking to ex-athletes like yourself and hearing of the journey identifies the key steps that people who have made a successful transition took, and it provides a roadmap, if you will, for people to say, well, that's what James did, that's what I heard Joe talking about, that's what I've heard Don talking about, we're going to go and do the same thing. So just in no particular order there, the fact that you were exploring things that may or may not fit, you went and did your coaching badges. Now, you haven't gone into coaching, but you're exploring it. You were taking some time to enhance your skill set with your masters in psychology and doing some study work around the playing. The third area that we hear a lot is looking at the network that exists. You were doing that. You were spending time with your CEO who was in this financial sector. And then you were doing your exams, having identified that as an area you'd like to be involved with so that you could accelerate your time into the financial academy and come out of that in an accelerated time frame. So there's 4 or 5 themes in there, which I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, would have made it a lot easier to say, bearing in mind the signals you were seeing in the changes of the game and perhaps the hamstring and maybe the eyes not being as sharp, you took a lot of the fear and anxiety away through your own proactivity. Is that a first statement, James? That because you'd done all of that, you knew where you were going, it almost became a lot easier to say, I'm ready to step out.
It gave me So from a practical level, it gave me some tools. It gave me some strategies to be able to manage that process on a practical level. So from kind of a broad stroke, high level view, they were all great. They were all fine. I think you can definitely go a bit deeper with athletes transitioning out of careers because of, and you would have talked to this to previous guests, I'm sure, around identity, and you can go a lot deeper into that, and actually you can put all these practical things in place, whether it's getting exams, whether it's doing coaching badges, but there's definitely a deeper kind of question around how like attachment and self-identity are rugby players, cricketers, ex-professional sports people, people in the military. How strongly are they connected, and is that self-identity connected to their self-worth? So suddenly they're not, they're not a professional sports person anymore. Are they feeling less kind of valuable within themselves, less worthy? So I think there's a deeper bit that athletes can go on, just to say, how attached am I to this sport? I certainly started detaching myself early on. So actually, I knew that when I finished, cricket wasn't everything to me. Perspectives, family, career. I'm tend to be more that I can look at a slightly bigger picture stuff. It wasn't a be all end all to me, cricket. So actually diving a bit deeper into that is massively important for sports people, because they could go through all those bits and get exams. Actually, they finish, and then 5, 10 years time, they might have to have another career change, or it hasn't quite worked out, or the finances have dropped off, and they're struggling to pay the mortgage. They're walking down the street and they're suddenly not a professional sports person. They might put on a bit of weight. There's so much deeper stuff that actually needs to be supplied and supported to athletes that are transitioning, rather than just those practical steps.
No, I think that's very well said, James. And I think the practical side gives you that roadmap, doesn't it? It gives you a degree of direction of where you're moving towards. But that loss of identity, we always say when we're working with individual athletes one-to-one, it happens to the very best. There's absolutely no sense of shame or frustration. Why am I feeling like this? We reference frequently the dialogue that Dan Carter's put out about how he struggled being one of the greatest rugby players ever to play the game, and then stopped and really struggled because, and particularly for guys like yourself that have been in that environment for so long. So just taking you back a sec, because it's always interesting to hear how people dealt with that. You talked about detachment. Just explain a little bit more about what you meant by that. Is that you were thinking about, right, I want to build my own business, I want to get into this wealth management space, so you're detaching from the cricket and moving towards that? Or just, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's an interesting point for people to listen to, that sort of detaching yourself from the sport so that it's not your full identity. Just expand on that, James, please.
I think it stems from, sports people, I think people just assume that they create this identity when they sign that first professional contract. Actually, usually it's embedded from when they were toddlers and being told how good they are at sport, and that's all they do. Even in school, they're usually the best sports people, and it kind of stems. So it's quite deep from that. My role within cricket was a batter, and within batting, you fail so many more times than you succeed. So you have to have a coping strategy on a day-to-day basis with getting over failure. And a lot of people really struggle with that. And it's probably why they aren't consistent enough when they're batting, talking specifically about batting initially. But I created some coping mechanisms around perspectives quite early on in my cricket career to get over those failures. So you need to get over it quick, because you might be batting the next day. And actually, I think moving on to kind of your question, that helped me the whole way through, in terms of, right, well, cricket's here, but essentially it's hitting a red leather ball with a wooden bat on a green grass field. There's a lot more going on in the world than this little game of cricket, and you like doing a bit of reading or listening to different podcasts, and actually the scale of cricket is just so insignificant so that's how I played it in my mind. So actually, if I lost cricket, what have I got at the moment? I've still got 3 young, amazing kids and wife, house over my head, food. Financially, I'm not wealthy, but worst case scenario, I'll still be fine. So that was how I, my internal monologue. That's how I spoke to myself, and actually, that detachment just gradually increased as my performances were dropping off in cricket, or I was quite aware that it was then coming to an end. I started thinking, well, I don't kind of have any identity as necessarily a financial advisor. My identity is as a husband and as a family and as a parent, and I think that's quite a robust one. But that's just how I spoke to myself, and I know that's not necessarily easy to do, but I found that comfortable with being able to manage that process up to retirement.
And I think it's not an easy thing to do, but that's why thank you for articulating that. I think it's important for people to hear. We're talking very much about perspective, and I think what links into that is gratitude. You know, we've all been there. You have a good game, everything feels good in the world, relationships, everything. Your presence with the kids is better. You have a bad game, and everything looks a bit less rosy. You're a bit more abrupt, a bit shorter, etc. So we often spend time with individuals just getting them to step back, get some perspective, identify what really is important to them, and often relationships, whether they've got children or not, loved ones, a partner, etc., extended family, friendships, their health, all of those things are central and will carry them through whatever role they do. You mentioned something earlier that not everybody walks straight out into a perfect ready-made role. You may step into one thing, decide it's not for you, move into the next thing. But those constants that you identify in that perspective process, and those things you can always be grateful for, I think give you a bit of a North Star to really lean into when this transition takes place. And so I think you've obviously identified that you wanted to work for yourself. I just want to just touch on that, James, because this is another theme that comes through from a lot of athletes, that they've got a desire to be entrepreneurial. And in some cases, it's, well, they've got something quite substantive in their mind. They've got the seed of an idea, or they're already taking substantive steps to bring that business to the fore. Other times it's just, I like the idea of building something for me, but I'm not quite sure where I want to be. So tell us a little bit about the entrepreneurial side. And I suppose we're going a little bit wider context here so that people that are perhaps still competing are listening to you going into that world and working for yourself. Because in our experience, there are so many traits that elite sportsmen and women have that lend themselves very well to having the courage to step into that entrepreneurial pursuit and build something new as you've done. But be interested just to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was because I'm particularly entrepreneurial. I think I've gone into that because of some of the qualities that brings. So, back end of my career during the off seasons, I was working kind of employed a couple of days a week at a private bank, London private bank. They got offices in Exeter, and those guys were great there. They clock in 8:30, they leave at 5. Salaried, employed. And we had a meeting once, I think it was about November time, and the guy, the head of the office, asked a question. So who's going to be available to work between Christmas and New Year? And then, everyone's head goes down, or a few people put their hands up. And that kind of was a bit of a light bulb moment for me, because I was thinking, well, I've never worked between Christmas and New Year. I don't want to work between Christmas and New Year. And actually, most people don't have that flexibility, don't have that choice. So I suddenly thought, well, actually, how can I choose, do my own diary, get out what I put in, that kind of meritocracy bit, no ceiling to it, go into a business where I can go and watch my kids play in their matches, do the pickups if I want to, work in the evening if I want, work on a Saturday and take Monday and Tuesday off, take the wife away for a few days if we want to, but just have that flexibility. So I don't know if that's necessarily entrepreneurial, but going into that kind of world, if you can make it work, gives you that kind of flexibility. So I think it was those traits and characteristics that propelled me more towards going self-employed than necessarily wanting to grow a big organization. I wanted a better work-life balance. And I suppose my ex-cricket coaches would probably just say, well, he doesn't like being told what to do anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there is some of that. People that set their own businesses up. But jokes aside, the point you make there is interesting. I heard on a podcast recently about the notion of being an entrepreneur. This gentleman was reframing it, saying, "I see entrepreneurship as freedom, having the ability to have freedom," and they articulated a very similar scenario to you. Being present, having the agility and the freedom to spend your time how you want and where you want. And I think that's important for people considering what is success, because in that sporting landscape, it's very binary, isn't it? As you say, you go out to bat, do I score a century? Do I not? Do I increase my average? I'm out for a golden duck. And everybody's got those perspectives in their sporting context, but there is no one size fits all. And we, again, spend a lot of time in small groups and one-to-one with athletes. And just because teammate over here or your teammate over there is very fixed on, I'm going to do this next, I'm going to be a coach, or I'm going to go into financial services, it doesn't mean you have to. You've got to look within and say, what is success? And often when we're coaching people who are entrepreneurial, they talk very similarly to you. I want to be at my children's sports days. I want to be able to go and take clients out and entertain where I want. You take some back to cricket, which is dear to your heart, or I want to take them out and play a round of golf on my terms. So I think it's that freedom agenda is very pertinent, is very pertinent.
And I think, and you would have, you would have read the books and listened to the podcast and kind of Simon Sinek start with with your why kind of thing. So
Yes.
what is your why is a question that I would always ask people, and actually a lot can stem from that. So that coupled with I can't remember what it's called. Is it the success fallacy?
Right.
Whatever you get, actually you're pretty disappointed a few days later. Johnny Wilkinson talks about it in the 2003 World Cup final. Dan Carter talks about it. It's so common. And actually, when you kind of take a step back, more of that stoic Buddhist kind of philosophy, actually you can sit back and go, well, I could be chasing this. I could be chasing the wanting to be the England coach or wanting to earn this amount of money. You get there, and what do? You go, well, I'll just try and push for something else then, because that was a bit disappointing. So it's kind of, if you can reflect on that a bit and the why bit, you actually go, well, maybe, time is probably the most valuable asset we've got. And if you
Absolutely.
can create some more time in your week, then what's that worth?
Yeah, 100%. And it was Simon Squibb, I think you just prompted me that I'd heard say that. When he said Simon said it was Simon Squibb who actually was talking about entrepreneurism as that analogy for freedom. So
Yeah.
just moving into the sort of reflection piece again, James, do's and don'ts, because we're both big believers, Carl and I, that life takes you where you're meant to be. You shouldn't really have regrets. Everything's the learning experience and all those cliches that we hear trip out regularly. But nonetheless, that being said, there are a number of people that listen to our show that, as we know, as the community grows, that are still very much entrenched in their sporting career. They're still competing. They're thinking about life beyond sport. They don't know exactly when it's going to come. So we like to ask this question to guests who have already transitioned into industry and say, if you had to pull out a do, something you should do, something you should consider doing to make that transition a little bit easier, and if you had to think of something you shouldn't do, avoid doing, to try and make that transition a little bit easier. With the benefit of hindsight, James, what comes to mind for you in answer to those questions?
Again, two very good questions. I mean, I think the do question is probably easier to answer. I mean, I think there's also this theory that your sporting career, you'll only get better and better by doing everything within your sporting career. Like, I'm quite a big believer in kind of cross learning. So you definitely go and do as much as you can, not just in other sports, but go and spend some time in businesses. Businesses will eat you up. They'll want you to go in and work for them, or do just some work experience that can benefit you on the sporting field as well. And don't think of it as separate. There's this separation between sporting life and outside. Actually, they can merge quite well together. So I think in terms of do's, the obvious ones are just go and speak to people that are involved, the sponsors, the get into the boxes, just go and try and understand a bit more around the outside world. Often sports people are obviously wrapped in cotton wool a bit and told what to do. Actually, just go and speak to them. There's some fascinating people out there to learn from. And the biggest thing, I think, is actually go and find out what you don't want to do. It's quite hard to find out what you do, but it's easy to find out what you don't. You just go and have to speak to some people and think, God, I don't want to do that. And so that's quite an easy thing to do, but it's putting yourself out there a bit. I think so. So in terms of do's, just do whatever you can and to find out what you don't want to do. So I don't know if that answers both
No,
questions.
but it's great.
Perfect.
Great answers. And I know Carl was smiling there to your point about stepping out of your intense focus on your performance. I know, Carl, this is something you researching a lot, the science that it can actually taking the focus away from your technical endeavor can improve it. So it's not that you're being negligent to your sporting pursuit. You take time away, and we interviewed Conrad Smith recently. He was another advocate of this. Get out of the gym, get out of the analysis of your performance, do something totally different. Helps you build that transition in the future, but it also will help your performance. Is that something that you would agree with as well, James? Yes, you're taking your head away, but did it help your game, do you think?
Absolutely. And again, this goes down and probably and Carl probably knows the name of the theories, but like when you're doing a crossword or a Sudoku and you're wrapped up in it and you take a step away, not that I do many of them, to be honest, it was just a analogy, and then you and then you take a step away, you go back in and you see it straight away. And I think
Yeah.
the same kind of theory can be applied in sport. You're going through a bad trot. Some people love just drilling it, getting back up there, hitting balls. Actually, sometimes by getting a bit of perspective, by going away, by just, going away for a couple of days, just get away from the environment. You come back in and you do feel refreshed. You don't
Yeah,
necessarily know why, but it does seem to make a difference. So whether that is finding out about potential future careers, transitioning, or whatever it is, it could be anything. But actually,
exactly.
that separation can, not for everyone, but can definitely help some people.
And I think I'm pleased that you articulated that so well, James, because one of the things we struggle with is the younger athlete. The man or lady that's still very much saying their early to mid 20s, they feel invincible, the career's going to go on forever. Why would I need to be thinking about the future? That's the challenge one. The second challenge is I haven't got time. There's obviously you only know what you know, and it's I've got to be always on my game, either in the gym or back, in the nets in your case, hitting balls or working on my technique. So the more we hear people who have been there and done it like yourself saying, actually, change your perspective. It's not all about necessarily doing a course, as you say, but you might spend some time with a mentor or a coach. You might go and have a coffee with one of the sponsors, as you said. Changing your perspective will help you in the future and it will help your game. I think that's going to be a bit of a breakthrough for us because so many ex-athletes are saying it can help your game. And especially in the modern game, I think it's become so analytically heavy. There's data points and camera angles from everywhere now, which almost pulls you into feeling like you've just got to assess video continually. So I think that's really powerful to hear that you saw an uplift in your game as well by taking that step back.
Yeah, it's getting the balance, isn't it? So it's not doing all or nothing.
Of
It's
course.
it's athletes say they haven't got much time, but in my experience, athletes do a fair bit of traveling, and it doesn't have to be much to just pick up a bit of a book or make a phone call or send an email just to have a chat with someone. To understand a bit more about their world. There's lots of time. There might be time where you think you're busy, but you're not. You're sitting in a hotel room or you're on the bus, and it doesn't take much to just have a look at something on the internet. Think actually that's quite interesting. Okay, if I wanted to get into that, how do I? And it
Yes.
just takes you a little bit away from kind of day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Just I also jump back to one other point you made, and there's absolutely no criticism here of anybody that gets into coaching. It's a wonderful pursuit for so many people around the world. But again, in a recent interview with Conrad Smith, he was encouraging people to just think a bit outside the sport. He made the point that a lot of people think, well, I've been in rugby for so long, the only thing I can do is coach. And so they go down that path. Now, you obviously started down that path where you got your coaching qualifications. And I think it's also powerful just to hear you just reflect on that just a little bit more deeply, James, because a lot of sportsmen and women that we talk about feel a lack of confidence of, well, I know this, I think I'll stay in it and coach. But when we probe a bit deeper and say, is that success? Is that going to give you fulfillment? No, not really. I don't really want to do it, but it's what I know. And so they drift into that to almost pay the bills. So did you have that exploratory process yourself? Were you thinking maybe, and then you got a bit closer to it and thought, this isn't for me, and pulled back from that?
Yeah, I think I've always known that I didn't really want to coach. But for the exact reasons that you just said, that identity piece, staying in the game, comfort zones, it's what I know. There's that admiration around staying in the game. You have conversations like this, or you can mentor players. So I knew that if I was going to get into coaching, I wanted it to be kind of at the professional level. Then I realized actually it wasn't about coaching at all. I wanted to stay in the professional level because that is the life I've known for 20 years. And it was just it was kind of like, okay, I need to not have the strength, that's the wrong term, but just have a go at doing something else, a different challenge. Coaching will always be there. I'll always be able to go into a school or another environment if I wanted to go back to that, but putting myself outside of my comfort zone a bit, going into something else. So mine was probably my coaching career probably ended quite quickly, because of just that. No, I'm doing this for the wrong reasons. I'm
Hmm.
doing this because I feel like I just want to be on the bus, going into the hotel rooms and chucking balls at players when actually, that's not delivering what I need in life really. That's just carrying on the cricketing treadmill, which eventually life can change pretty quick in the coaching world as well. And if it did, then I would be lost then, I think.
Well, and that's the ultimate perversity, I suppose, of it, that people think there's security in staying in coaching, but actually it's one of the least secure career paths you can follow, and actually it's pretty small when you look at the number of professional clubs, teams in certain sports, in rugby, cricket particularly. There's only a finite number of coaching roles. So I think it's powerful, again, just for people to hear, though, that you did this exploratory searching, reflection while you were still playing, as opposed to, I've retired, I'm going to be a coach. Then you feel that enhanced level of pressure. This is how I'm making my living now. This doesn't feel quite right. Oh, well, I'll stay within it. You had the ability to explore things, as you said in your earlier points, find the things you don't like as much as the things that you do.
Yeah.
And one other thought in my mind where you've gone to, perhaps this does form a bit of a bridge, because I imagine into the financial space that you are now, you are still tapping into your network that you built over 20 years and supporting people. So you're still connected to the game in some capacity, because I imagine you're offering your services into the professional space. So that was one element of the question. The second element, James, is finance a fear that you find with a lot of retiring sportsmen and women? Because it's certainly something we see near the top of most people's concerns, that either they haven't necessarily perhaps looked after the money in the way, with hindsight, that they wanted to, or more frequently that they've earned a good living, but it's not something that can set them up for the long term. And there's a real fear and concern about, well, my salary is going to drop as I step out of sport. So they almost feel trapped. I've got to stay in sport for the salary. And there's this little bit of a blind spot really around finance, which I imagine is the very place that you can help people in terms of building a plan, removing some of that financial fear and pressure.
So much to unpack here in those two questions. Firstly, the coaching bit, I think generally sports people, athletes want to coach and want to help. And actually, my role now is pretty much doing that anyway. But I'm just coaching people within finances rather than cricket. And with all the things that have happened over the last few weeks with Donald across the pond,
Yeah.
often actually I'm still a coach in that respect, but just with a slightly different angle to it. That's how I look at it. I'm a finance coach, and my clients are the players, and I'm just trying to support them with building up their portfolios, or paying less tax, whatever that is. So
Yes.
and those coaching badges that I did up to my level 4 badge, actually they help me massively in what I do around communication, around how to talk to people, how to manage relationships. All of that coaching stuff actually is just as valuable in what I do now. And I think sometimes athletes, when they're in their careers, the transferable skills are huge. So, and they might not have any kind of letters after their name, but actually I think just the awareness of what they've had to go through, managing, regulating emotions, all the skills that they've had to develop during being an athlete. Actually, there's so many businesses that would love those skills afterwards if they can get in front of them and have the confidence just to go, if it is coaching, I will coach, but I'll do it with something else and
That's a good
not necessarily
perspective.
sport.
Yeah.
So that was the first part of that question. I still feel I am a coach. The second part is a systemic thing. I mean, our country is just dreadful at financial education within schools. It's terrible. I mean, you ask kids coming out of schools, what is a mortgage? How do you get insurance? What interest rates? Anything. Pretty much most kids would be like, I don't know how to get a mortgage or apply for my student loan. What's debt? All that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. So, and that carries all the way through in terms of a sporting context. Obviously, athletes generally probably might earn slightly more than their peers when they first go into the workplace at 18. They get comfortable with the lifestyles that they live while they're playing sport. Obviously, there's a massive range in terms of what you can
Of course.
with
Yeah.
what sport. And managing that in career finance is actually generally pretty easy. You just you use your different tax wrappers. You try and build in some kind of long-term planning within that. But that transition bit is, that's the cliff edge potentially, and that's when the income stops, and that's 40% of footballers go bankrupt. It's just because they live that lifestyle, and the advice that they've got generally with some sports, they get advice from their agents. Their agents aren't necessarily in it for their long-term financial plans. They're in it for the product while they're an athlete. So I think that's a bit of an issue. And then obviously, just coming to terms with the fact that they might still be earning going into the coaching world, but it's a lot less, and they've taken on big debt with their mortgages, and they've got to try and repay that. on a minimal salary, and all of that kind of stuff exacerbates the whole situation. So it comes from, schooling. Athletes' careers are very different to the kind of normal world, outside world, but then trying to manage that transition and then having that long-term perspective around how are we going to carry on helping you post-career is massive as well. And there needs to be a lot more support for athletes on that transitional point. But actually, part of what I try and build in my planning firm is you're helping athletes during their career, helping them with that transition, and then that kind of longer term planning piece up to actual retirement when they finish playing. So
Yeah.
there's so much more to it than just actually their sporting careers.
Absolutely. And you're right, there's a lot to unpack. You did a good job in answering that. I know it's a very, very big question, but you've struck on something that we're very passionate about that as well. There's not enough education. And both my parents are retired teachers. You go right back into the education system. It's something my dad said for years. People come out, they get credit cards, don't understand what the interest is. There's a huge gap, which you're doing your part to fill. We're trying to help encourage people that, like everything in life, if you've got gaps, try and fill them. Speak to the right people, seek out the mentors, the advisors like yourself that feel the right fit for them. Go online, try and find the right source for you, the right book, the right podcast. There's information all around, but don't suffer in ignorance, because it's too important. So, James, it's been a fascinating conversation. Just wanted to try something a bit different. We haven't done this yet, but we just wanted to throw a few quick fire questions at the end, just to get your perspective on these. We're not holding you to the clock, but we're just thinking, well, let's just try something that's a bit shorter and sharper, just to wrap things up, and it just gives us another reference point to help people along the journey. So, if we're going to take you back again in that, I don't know, we did something similar to this, but I'm just going to reframe it. If you were to go back to your younger professional self as a cricketer, what piece of advice would you give yourself from a performance perspective, from a purely cricketing perspective, now with the benefit of hindsight?
Oh, it's got to be quick fire, isn't it? I would, I would probably, I would say I should have got out my comfort zone earlier on in my career in terms of training. So that would be, so I feel like um, I was probably told that I was quite talented from quite a young age, and I think on reflection, it was didn't necessarily help me with the early stages of my professional career. I was a bit complacent, and I should have put more, um, probably harder work into my training.
Great. No, it's a good answer. But despite that, you still managed to hang in there for 20 years. So you didn't do a bad job in the end. Now, the next one is just making you think around transition. If you could speak to yourself as a professional player, maybe there isn't anything that springs to mind on this one, James, but if you gave yourself a piece of advice to make that transition into industry that bit easier, to remove some of that friction, is there anything that comes to mind to say, a bit of advice to make that a good transition out of sport into industry?
Be more inquisitive all the way through. There's no bad conversations, so there's no wasted time. You can speak to anyone and potentially learn from them around where you might want to go. I was quite focused on too focused on sport, and I'm introvert naturally, so my default is to go into my bubble. Actually get out there, go speak to people. People want to speak to you, and you can learn so much from just having a coffee, sit down conversation with someone.
Yeah, well said. Now, we've talked about you giving advice to your younger self. Step back from that. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given, James? It might be professional, it could do with cricket, life, business, doesn't matter. What stands out for you as the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Well, this is going to sound so stupid, but we had a chap called Ricky Ponting play for us early on in my
Yeah.
career.
He was all right, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He did all right for himself.
Yeah.
And I was having a net. This is not particularly quick fire, so apologies
No,
for
it's
that.
okay.
I was having a net at Taunton once, and the net wasn't going particularly well, which was pretty standard for me. And he was standing at the other end, and he came down to me and said, I was going to swear then, but I won't swear. He said, "Watch the ball." And I was like, "Is this bloke? I know he's captain of Australia, but come on, mate. Like, watch the ball." I'm in a pretty dark place anyway, and I'm thinking, of course, I'll watch the ball. Carried on with the net, and he came down and goes, "You're not watching the ball." was like, is this a joke? Like, I know he's good, but of course I'm watching the ball. I'm kind of played
Yeah.
cricket for a little while, but in the end it was fascinating because it went so much deeper after chatting to him, and it was kind of that watch the ball comment was actually nothing to do with watching the ball. And it was the best piece of advice he gave me because often you'd speak to athletes who say the same thing. Actually, when you're playing at your best, there's not a lot of noise going on upstairs between your ears. Actually, the more clarity and calm and silence you've got, often the better you play. And so I went back and just the next net just said, right, I'm going to watch the ball. And that's when the light bulb went off. I said, actually, by watching the ball, I'm not saying to myself, he's going to bowl short. I need to get forward. I need to pull this. How's everyone thinking about me? That kind of judgment. Actually, that watching the ball, again, it's that kind of mindfulness piece and being present, which I learned to do more and more in my career. That was easily the best piece of advice I've had, and it was as simple as watch the ball. But what came from that was quite transformative for me.
Fabulous. No, James, I love it. What a great way to finish. And I think quieting the mind and being present is so relevant to transition. We hear so many athletes, what are people going to think? People are looking at me. They're watching to see what I do, how good a job I get, how well my business grows. And we always say, with the benefit of hindsight, we've all walked on this path. People don't care. Everybody's thinking about themselves in the same way that you used to beat yourself up in the nets or out in the middle of the field in whatever discipline you're playing. What are people going to think? They're all thinking the same thing. Everyone's thinking about themselves. So we sometimes need those anchors, those triggers that you've alluded to. Watch the ball in your case to quiet all that noise down. Focus on what's in front of you and do the very best with what you've got right in front of you in that moment, and the momentum will build itself. But you've just got to close out that noise. So I think that's a very pertinent piece of advice for people on field and indeed off the field as they go into the transition.
Yeah, we definitely overplay the self-importance. People are really not that bothered.
Yeah, exactly. And once you realize that, it's a horrible thing to say on the one hand. You think, well, am I not that important? Of course we all are, but everybody's focused on their own problems, and let's not lose too much sleep and energy worrying about what other people think, especially if it stops you pursuing your dreams. So
absolutely.
James, wow, what a great conversation. Loved it. Carl, is there anything that you want to add to James? I think we've hit some great points there today.
I don't think there's anything you've mentioned that James and I don't agree with.
True.
I think you've sort of very nicely articulated everything James and I have in terms of our conversations behind closed doors with athletes on a one-to-one basis. I think this has been fantastic. And once again, I've been a lovely passenger just listening.
Yeah, well,
my
we've got in the flow.
piece.
I think you do yourself a disservice, Carl. I think you
No, it's my favourite thing to do.
Well, listen, James, if people want to find you, where's the best place for them to connect? Is it LinkedIn? Is that the best place for people to reach out if they want to explore any further discussions with you personally?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, kind of LinkedIn or my website hildrethfinancial.com if you wanted to get in touch. LinkedIn's probably the best place.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for your time, James. I know people will certainly be reaching out with you after the wisdom you've shared today, and we look forward to continuing our relationship with you in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. Thanks, Carl.
Thanks,
you, James.
mate. Thanks for joining us this week on our ATA podcast. If you found this conversation insightful and it resonates with your journey, please subscribe, follow the show, and stay connected with us for more insight, resources, and information on how we at ATA are supporting your preparation for life beyond the game.